Welcome, dear viewers, to another IT talk today, together with Andrew Hewitt, a lead analyst from Forrester. I'm so happy to welcome him here today in our webcast. Andrew Hewitt, known for years now, is also author of several wave studies, such as the UEM wave for endpoint management or the DEX wave. And I'm so glad to have you here today, Andrew. Welcome to our.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here. Really looking forward to our conversation. We were talking before. We always have a great back and forth. So excited to talk about some of the latest trends that we're hearing in the marketplace.
Right. Today, we would like to talk about the future of endpoint management. It's something that is your expertise in all its dimensions. When I look back, Andrew, what do you remember? How did it all start when you did your first Unified Endpoint Management wave? What do you remember? When was the launch of this headline?
Yeah, so it's interesting. Looking at the convergence that's happening across both Unified Endpoint Management and DEX. Originally when it was, the first Unified Endpoint Management wave, it was an evolution from EMM or Enterprise Mobility
Mhm.
Management. A lot of that focus was on mobile endpoints and making sure that they were secured and configured, correctly. And as UEM started to get more and more popular amongst enterprise clients and amongst SMB and commercial size customers, we started to see the rise of this other market, called DEX, which in many ways provided a lot of the real-time, telemetry information that oftentimes is super helpful when you're looking at managing your endpoint estate at scale. And so those two markets kind of evolved separately, and now what we're starting to see is the convergence of both of those. So it's been really interesting to watch that almost every unified endpoint management tool on the market today is collecting some type of DEX information. And there's obviously
Mhm.
different
Mhm.
levels of maturity there, but what's interesting is that DEX is something that's being part of every endpoint management tool into the future. So hopefully that makes it easier for me. Maybe at some point I'll only have to write one of these waves, but at this point, there's still kind of two separate markets.
That's right. As you say, it's one evolution hunting another evolution. So it's not a real cut, but it's always evolution after evolution, migrating from Windows management to unified endpoint management, and now the DEX story comes in. When I think back, I remember there was the pandemic, and we all were about to move home in the home offices. And as I recall, we did put more focus on the people then. So
Yes.
first, focusing on the endpoints and making all the machines run perfectly, we then started to be more and more aware that it's all about people. How do the people feel at home? Can they really work in a productive way from the home office?
Hmm.
And this was also the rise of thinking in DEX structures for baramundi. And now it's a couple years ago, and we are still thinking in this pattern. And I think we can be glad that this evolution came across. And as you say, the combination of UEM and DEX feels quite natural for us. It's a kind of new evolution as well.
Hmm.
And what I feel is it's more about data, collecting data, telemetry. So this brings me to the question, Andrew, would be your definition if you need to define the DEX term, the digital employee experience? What's your definition?
Well, the way that I originally defined DEX at Forrester, when we first did research in this space back in 2018, so even like before the pandemic, we had started to see the rise of these tools, and employee experience had become more of a differentiator for companies, especially when it came to digital workplace technologies. And then that was accelerated through the pandemic. But the original definition was the sum of perceptions that employees have working with the technology they use daily, right? So it's not about the tech itself. It's about how do I actually feel about the combination of all of this tech together and whether it actually enables me to be successful at the end of the day and go home and say, hey, I really did a great job at work today, or whether it gets in the way. I think, for many, many years and continually, the tech environment can actually just introduce more disruptions and distractions. And so that's why we defined it that way, is that we really wanted to look at this from the end user perspective. At the
Mhm.
end of the day, doesn't really matter what IT thinks is the quality of their service. What really matters is what the employees think and whether they feel like they can be productive. And so there's kind of that whole holistic, high level goal around DEX, which is really impacting that perception. And we've run with that for a number of years at Forrester. Now, there's also that smaller definition too, which is really kind of around the DEX market itself. And so what we're continuing to see here is a host of different vendors, including Baramundi, that are offering DEX capabilities. And when you think about it in the context of endpoint management or end user computing or digital workplace, DEX is really about exactly what you said. It is data-driven approach to digital workplace, right? So it's understanding the quantitative information that's coming from your devices and applications. It's understanding the qualitative sentiment of how the employee actually interacts with that. And it's basically bringing that data strategy into the endpoint management stack. And so that's how I define it today. It's an agent-based solution or a browser-based plugin that collects telemetry data that you can use to troubleshoot technology, to drive remediation, or to measure the overall quality of the experience.
So you mentioned perception. I like this idea. The perception as it is perceived by the end user might actually differ from this, what the administrator thinks he was doing to them. In most cases, we hope it's identical. So a good modification was done and it's fine for everybody. But there are these exceptions, or maybe it's more than just an exception, where the result of some change management is not perceived as an improvement. And especially into this topic, we need to point and highlight this also to administrators so that everybody is aware of a mismatch. And for this purpose, not only have an emotion, but having data to prove that there is some mismatch. This really helps to get the whole discussion on another level. So to have history, telemetry, and look back what went well and what did not went well. So speaking of collecting data, our impression is that it's normally the big enterprises that they can afford to collect all these mass data when it comes to new technology. What is your impression when you compare enterprise business to a rather mid-sized business? And this is actually what we as Baramundi cater for. We are optimizing all these technology solutions to be easy to use for mid-sized companies. What is your perspective on enterprise and mid-sized collecting data?
Great question. I mean, certainly the initial adoption of DEX solutions was focused on the enterprise. When I did my first wave and subsequent waves on this space afterwards, and looking at the custom reference list, is all giant brand names that I'm sure that I know, that our audience knows, right? So that's where it really started. And a lot of that is because there's so much complexity at the enterprise level. You have access to skills that can go and learn these tools. You maybe have a dedicated team for DEX, for example, right? And so it was a good environment to start there. And what we also see from our data at Forrester is that SMB size customers are also looking at DEX. What I think is really interesting about DEX is it's very horizontal. There is a bit of verticalization that's happening, but in general, if your organization has computers, laptops, mobile devices, whatever, you can benefit by using data to manage those devices in a better way, right? So pretty much every organization is able to do that. And so what we've started to see in the market is DEX going downstream to those SMB customers, but it often looks a little bit different, right? It's not, okay, I'm going to go and I'm going to highly customize this for my particular environment. I'm going to hire a team of 10. No, right? It's a lot of templates that are built into the platform, a lot of automation, a lot of really kind of bringing the customer through that journey of developing the use cases rather than kind of starting this giant initiative. That's really what we see, and oftentimes DEX needs to sit alongside other capabilities too. So endpoint management and configuration, endpoint security, right? So we see more of this platform-based approach in the SMB where they don't necessarily want a standalone DEX capability that they have to integrate. They want more of that platform-based approach that's already integrated with whatever capabilities they already have. And so that's one of the major differences, I would say, between DEX at the SMB level and DEX at the enterprise level is you're much more likely to get standalone at the enterprise level, much more likely to get platform at the SMB level.
Yeah, fully agree. You spoke of enterprises having so many resources to afford having separate teams only dedicated to DEX. And this is exactly the difference for our customers space. In the mid-sized market, we feel that administrators are quite often covered with many, many different tasks.
Yep.
So the same people being responsible for software deployment, for patching, as well as for DEX questions. I mean, at the end, they're all asking the same questions. Are our employees well equipped and have the right means of technology to be productive? But the difference in midsize is that it's a few people being responsible for all that stuff. And we as Baramundi always try to combine these different views into a single product or a family of products. Actually, we do have an independent DEX solution now, but our aim is always to combine and integrate these solutions to work together, to exchange data, which was the same at the time when the mobiles come up. So we also included Windows management with mobile management to make a solution out of it. And now for us, the history is repeating. We try to combine the DEX and the UEM to bring it together in an overall solution, being aware that it might be different people being responsible, but quite often it's the same people doing all the jobs in parallel. So this is, I think, a major difference. So it's about integration and data to be collected. What else comes to your mind when you think of integrating a DEX solution with other known categories in the IT management? Is it just UEM, or do you see even more integration benefits or challenges?
UEM is one of the core ones. And the reason for that is that DEX is often used to make sure that the UEM agent is installed. That's a common use case. It's also required for a lot of remediation tasks, like pushing out a patch, for example. So that one's very common. The other most common one, I would say, is ITSM integration. So I should be able to take information from my DEX capability and be able to see at least some of that information within my ITSM tool and be able to take action on that, right? So, think about an L1 person that's integrating, that's working out of an ITSM tool. They want to be able to see, some basic information. Maybe this person had a blue screen of death, or they had a driver that was, pushed out and caused an issue, right? Or maybe just want to see some of the, historical issues that employee has been dealing with, right? So ITSM is often the really core area that we see, a lot of integration. So those two are really the most important. I mean, we do see it across other areas like virtual desktop environments. We'll see DEX integrated there. I see it in chatbot types of environments too. If someone wants to integrate with that DEX data and be able to interact with it from a chatbot perspective, I would see it there too. So there's a lot of places where that DEX data can drive a lot of value.
I agree with the two core categories that you mentioned. You said UEM, and UEM is a very good fit to also provide a solution, a remediation, you called it, for the problems that we detect we didn't saw before. So we were also thinking, when we give DEX capabilities to the administrators, we don't just want to sell them new problems that they didn't know about beforehand, but we also want to give them tools to resolve them. And that's the perfect match, as you say. You have the DEX for new visibility, but of course you also need an answer to all these new issues that you detect.
Absolutely.
And this is UEM. And the second category you mentioned, I think this is even more exciting. When you speak of ITSM, of help desk solutions, we see the big benefit and chance that comes up with DEX that you can act in a more proactive way. So maybe sometimes issues of several endpoints that will affect the end users even before they detect the issues. So you can get in front of the wave, you can resolve issues because of DEX telemetry before even the first ticket was raised. And I think this is a big chance for the DEX capabilities to solve problems even earlier and to keep the amount of work much, much lower. No?
Absolutely. Yep.
A good story. All this integration fits nice in the known infrastructure. So what, Andrew, would be your perspective on the future of all these capabilities working together? Where do you see the trend heading to?
So, back to like the original point, which is data-driven endpoint management is the future of endpoint management, right? And you need that data to drive AI types of workflow. So if you think about a more autonomous future, where endpoint management is actually starting to become more and more automated over time, it's going to need that data in order to do that. And so one of the key things that we've already started to see, and which is just going to accelerate, is that DEX is going to be part of every endpoint management solution. If you're running an endpoint management solution and you don't have access to real-time data, you're going to be doing things in a legacy way, and you're going to be flying blind in your environment. And so it's really, really important to start prioritizing this as a customer, so you have that visibility. So that would be the first thing, is like data is part of this. It's going to drive that AI revolution. We've started to see some of the AI capabilities within endpoint management tools, but it's really just the beginning, and we're going to see that really accelerated. And so if you think about how this overall impacts the administrator over the long term, they're going to be moving away from doing a lot of that really custom technical work that may be, let's say, on a single platform, for example, like Mac OS or Windows, and really starting to be an orchestrator across all of those different platforms using AI as a key tool. Now, AI is not going to replace those roles, but it is going to be something that people are going to have to learn. There's is that saying that's going around right now. It's not, AI is not going to take your job, but someone that knows how to use AI better than you is going to take your job. And so that's what's going to happen in this space as well. Admins are going to have to learn how to use AI to execute those tasks going forward. So that's going to be a major shift over the next 3 to 5 years.
Absolutely. It started with automation. I think automation is the core idea when it all started to do endpoint management in an orchestration way, not only caring about a single endpoint, but about masses of endpoints. So automation is key. Absolutely agree. And automation was there from the beginning in all the baramundi history. And it feels absolutely natural that AI is the next level of automation. What we experienced, even when we started with automating, but also now with incorporating AI, where a lot of research is now put from baramundi, we need to do it step by step. At the very beginning, there might be some AIs which feel more kind of alien than reasonable, and you want to slowly increase the volume or the degree of automation, I think. And I think it's very smart to keep the administrator in the loop, probably not only now, but also in the future, and give them all the controls, how much of automation, how much of AI do they want to use at the moment being. So our belief is that there's a kind of interaction. The administrator should always be in the driver's seat and have the full control how much AI shall run in the background or shall ask him and suggest him what to do next. This is how we use it at the moment. We want to make use of AI when it comes to machine learning algorithms that detect some patterns, some outliers, for example, and some incidents that sound familiar to make a problem out of it and be more efficient in solving these problems. No? Yeah, so we see a lot of efficiency growth. So administrator being in the loop, I agree with you. We are just at the beginning of all this AI technology wave. So what would you recommend to our viewers? How to proceed? How to get familiar with this new technology? What would be the different things to consider and the next steps to do from your perspective, Andrew?
Yeah, so there's a few things here, and you're right. We're at the beginning stages of this. Take something like patch automation, for example. In our most recent survey, just 25% of the respondents said that they did any type of automation of patching at all. So 75% of them said, hey, we're either piloting that or we're not really doing that at all, right? So, and that's only just a small piece of automation. It's not
Mhm.
like 100% automation of my patch environment. So, we're really at the beginning stages. And so when you think about this from an administration perspective, my recommendation is always to take kind of a risk-based approach here, right? Like you
Mhm.
want to start with the things that aren't going to be catastrophic if they go wrong, right?
Yeah.
So, a lot of folks they'll do disk-based cleanup. It's kind of an easy first use case where it has an impact on patches because you need to have enough space to put a patch out there, for example. But it's not something that's going to completely destroy the end user experience. If something goes wrong. On the other hand, you have things that are a lot more problematic. Drivers, registry settings, things of that nature. And so you want to have a good idea of those different steps along the way, what's from the least risky all the way to the most risky, right? And start
Mhm.
your automation in that kind of least risk framework, I think up front goes a long way. Especially if you're like a highly regulated customer, you need to be very, very cautious here. And so that's what I would recommend, really taking small steps. Don't go out and try to automate everything all at once, but pick
Mhm.
one or two things that are common, especially if they're, common ticket items that are repeatable you're seeing in your ITSM solution. Pick one or two things, make sure they're low risk, go out and automate them, get used to that. And then you can start building out more of those complex automations as you get more comfortable.
Mhm. You mentioned patching as an example, Andrew, and then patching is a wonderful story for the old UEM arena. What we learned and what became our second nature when we think of patching is rolling out new
Mhm.
software versions, not as a big bang, but step by step, speaking of rings, and
Yes.
always watching what happens to the first endpoints that are affected. Are they running smoothly? Do they show up hangs or crashes? And this makes the DEX telemetry so valuable. So they can reflect if there is a first ring causing more problems than in the past. Maybe it's an erroneous patch that we need to skip rather than deploy it over the whole company. And leveraging this feedback loop is such a valuable thing. We don't even need to wait for tickets to come up. We can
Right.
see what happens on the first endpoints that were covered, learn from it, reflect it to the administrator being in the loop, and then helping to decide when is a good time to start with the next ringer. So this is a very a nice round circle that evolves here. Speaking of
Exactly.
administrators or people as such, what would you say is the right role that should be responsible or care about the DEX experience? Is it just the administrator, or is it even more people?
Yeah, I mean, everybody in the business, I think, has a role to play. If you're managing any technology that impacts the employee at all, you have a role to play in improving the DEX at your organization. And so the market has certainly started with end user computing and service desk administrators because they're the
Mhm.
ones that can really benefit the most from that DEX capability. And frankly, the solutions are tailored for those buyers today. Um, but we also see folks, that are owners of applications, let's say Microsoft 365 or Google Workspace, and they want to be able to measure kind of the health of those applications, are very interested in DEX capabilities as well. I've seen a rise in interest from HR professionals who
Mhm.
are certainly interested in DEX because DEX impacts talent attraction, it impacts talent retention, employee engagement. They've been increasingly interested in things like DEX scores, but also collecting the sentiment data about the overall tech experience. And then I also see folks in areas like facilities management, for example,
Mhm.
getting into this. If I want to understand is my conference room technology running correctly? Like they're interested in that too. So the buyers for sure are focused on end user computing and service desk today, but there's a lot of folks that are influencers that can really benefit from this information as well.
Mhm. Makes sense, absolutely, Andrew. There's a huge buying center than in the past because keeping the good stuff, the good employees, by giving them technology, endpoints, computers they like to work with, I think it's an important part of the whole work life. If you
Yes.
don't like the tools that you get from the company, the risk might be higher that you tend to leave where you get better, nicer tools that really work as you do. So I think it's a great evolution that we currently can be part of, and of course we shape together. So I would be very happy, Andrew, if you would have the chance to reflect all the evolution in 1 or 2 or 3 years ago again. So it's exciting times. What is your final thought about this evolution? What comes to your mind, or what would be the next occasion we need to talk?
Yeah, so a couple of different things. One is I would repeat what I said earlier, which is DEX is going to be coming to every solution that you manage in a digital workplace. You should be using that DEX data. And I would say it's probably going to expand beyond end user computing and service desks as well. There's a lot of areas like intranet, search, all of those areas that impact that employee experience just as much as devices do. So I would expect to see that expand across the entire digital workplace. And with that, I would expect to see a lot of consolidation. We've started to see this in the market with a couple of different acquisitions over the past 6 to 12 months. Right now, the digital workplace is very fragmented. And so I think we'll continue to see, as DEX becomes more popular, that fragmentation start to consolidate into a couple of different hubs. It's never going to be one solution to rule them all, type of thing, but it's going to be a couple of different hubs. But overall, this is good for the industry. It's about time that we have data to make decisions, right? If you think about OT environments, or you think about even the back-end server infrastructure environments, they've had this data for years. And so that's why this is so exciting, is that for the first time ever, we're getting this data and we actually aren't guessing, we're knowing what is happening in the environment. And so that's what I'm super passionate about. I'm excited to see how it all continues to develop.
Absolutely. Making informed decisions, that's the best we can provide to all the people out there. And that makes our job even more satisfying. So Andrew, so many thanks to you for sharing all your knowledge, your market insight. Is always a big pleasure to talk to you. And thanks for joining us today for this call. I think we need to talk again in maybe a couple of months or years. It's worth to follow the evolution. And dear viewers, thank you also for joining us for this webcast. If you have any questions, I think no matter in the direction of Forrester, don't hesitate to get in touch with Andrew and look at his really inspiring studies, or get in touch with Baramundi as a vendor of all these tools. We are happy to hear from you. Thanks you for joining. Bye-bye, Andrew.
Thanks for having me.